And hello again. My name is Tetyana Filevska. I'm creative director of the Ukrainian Institute, and I'm co-curating this public program, which is part of the Ukrainian Pavilion at the 59th Venice Biennial. The series of events started in April and will end in November and are dedicated to decoloniality in art. This is the second part of this program and is dedicated to art as a weapon and as a target. We started yesterday with a conversation about the nature of the relationship between art and war and how, in some ways, inobvious they are, and the phrase that muses keep silent while the guns roar doesn't seem to be true all the time. So we started exploring different ways of interaction between art and war yesterday, and we will continue today to speak more about decoloniality and how war affects decoloniality and how it is, what is the role of war and how war is influences this process, and in particular relating to the current Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we will have at first a lecture and then following by a discussion. And I would like to invite our lecturer, Daria Badior, a journalist and co-founder of the Association of Critics of Ukraine. And Daria's talk will be dedicated to the power of culture at the time of war. Who will watch the Watchmen? Dasha, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you, the Ukrainian Institute and to all the organizers who arranged these events. And I encourage you to follow these events in the future. Tanya will announce it, I think, later. And I think this is a very, very important thing that we are gathering here. And speaking about all these issues we are mentioning now. Today I'm going. Well, the main topic that I wanted to explore today is the topic of positionality and the topic of who decides, who has the privilege. And how this privilege or this position of the decision maker could be reflected upon, and what does happen when people who have the responsibilities do not reflect upon their privileges. So, and to start with, I wanted to describe a little bit my own positionality for you to understand who am I and why I'm talking in this or that manner or about this or that topics. So the main thing about me now, I think, is that I come from a country where the war is happening right now. And this morning, Russian army, Russian missiles struck a big apartment building in Zaporizhia with at least 17 people dead. So right now, rescuers are finding the people who could be buried under the damaged and destructed building. And when I'm saying this out loud, that there is a war in Ukraine and I live, I cannot believe it sometimes. It is surreal to say it and to hear it, that someone says it. So the war, as we know, has been unfolding for the 8 years before the 24th of February. But after this, after these days, almost every region of Ukraine has been targeted by Russians. Some of the regions are occupied, partially or totally. A lot of people had died. both civilians and soldiers. And right now, as we speak, people die and are being tortured. And I think this is what we need to remember every single second. And this is also a part of my positionality. As a professional, as a journalist, as a critic, I am aware of this every moment. And I think that every professional and culture sector in Ukraine also does that. And it affects what we do and how we do that, how we speak, how we ask questions. And I think we're not the only ones that do that in this world, on this planet. I've been working as a journalist, as a critic for 12 years. And before that, 2014, I mostly wrote about cinema. I was a film critic. And I remain in some way. But after 2014, after the revolution of dignity, when this society, the civil society and the society, I think, in general, focused on the culture also, I focused on it too, and I have been working in a newspaper, and together with my colleagues, I reopened the culture section, and we focused in very detail about how cultural policies are made in Ukraine. And I think that it wouldn't be an overestimation if I say that most of the Ukrainian artists, curators, writers, culture makers of every sort dedicated themselves to the one simple motto: culture matters. It was very important for us to say that out loud and to prove to the Ukrainian government that culture matters and culture deserves good financing, and culture is the crucial part of the nation, of the system of the national defense. And now, since February 24, I think this stance is everywhere. Everyone, I think that we should not prove it anymore, and everyone understands that culture is a crucial part of this war, both in a good way and in a bad way too. And that's what I wanted to talk about. And I will show some photographs which illustrate cases that could be very symbolical and could unfold a lot of topics about the culture during the war, and about how culture could be a target and could be a weapon, or could be both, actually. But first, some statistics. According to the Ukraine's Ministry of Culture and Information Politics statistics, as of 2 days ago, 971 object of cultural heritage in Ukraine is damaged or ruined as a result of the latest Russian invasion. And we are not counting the objects that were ruined or damaged before the February 24. So it's much more. And this is the ethnographic museum in Mariupol, which was burned by the Russians, and collection of which is unknown, remains unknown. Mariupol Art Museum, for example, was looted by the Russians. And now in Mariupol, which is occupied by Russians also, Moscow archaeologists come from the Historical Society, and they claim to open like an office for the Russian Historical Society in Mariupol, and they are going to maintain some archaeological researches in Mariupol, which is has a very rich history. And I think these objects also could be looted to Russia, as the objects that are looted from Crimea, for example, for the 8 years. And may I remind you that this is the direct violation of the International Hague Convention of 1954, the second protocol, and this is an international, could be considered as an international crime. This Museum of Ukrainian national philosopher Grigory Skovoroda in Kharkiv region, which was directly destroyed by the missile. There is none of the military infrastructure there. So I think that it also could be said that this museum was destroyed on purpose. And I think this is very symbolically that the statue of Skovoroda is still staying while the building of the museum is ruined. And also one symbolic fact that this year is the year of 300 anniversary from the birth of Grigory Skovoroda. So Ukraine was preparing to the big celebrations of him, because he is a very prominent figure from the 18th century, the figure of Ukrainian philosophy tradition, teaching, ethics. So, and here it is. This is the Khan's Palace in Bakhchisarai in the occupied Crimea. And now, and for the last, I think 2 or 3 or maybe 4 years, there is a reconstruction there. Russian occupation administration is doing reconstruction there, and violating all the rules of the reconstruction. They don't use the authentic materials, they don't do the research, they just do whatever they want. While this palace is a big evidence of Crimean Tatar collective memory and Crimean Tatar identity and Crimean Tatar presence on this peninsula. And this evidence actually undermines the big Russian myth that Crimea is a Russian place. So one of the buildings of the complex of Khan's Palace dates back to the 16th century. And now, with this reconstruction, Russian authorities kind of change the fabric of the national history in Crimea, which also lies in the context that now, during these mobilization processes, a lot of Crimean Tatars are being served and are being engaged into Russian army. And they try to flee, of course, the Crimea, but they are the majority of people who are being given these messages to join the Russian army in Crimea. So this is a little bit of a optimistic story, as far as it could be optimistic, of course. This is the kitchen cabinet hanging on the wall of the destroyed home in Borodyanka. Borodyanka is a small town near Kiev, which was occupied at the beginning of the full-scale war. And when it was liberated by the Ukrainian army, this photo emerged in the network, in the internet, and everyone saw that on this cabinet that was hanging on the wall, there is a ceramic cockerel. And everyone wondered, what is this ceramic thing? It's a jar for water or for milk. Here it's like it was taken to the museum together with this cabinet from the kitchen, and everyone wanted to unfold what is this. And this is a jug, one of the products made on the Majolika factory back in in 1950s and 60s in Vasilkiv. This Majorika factory made a lot of such dishes, jars, and cups, and it was very popular projects. And this is it's also a very symbolic thing, how a plain thing from our kitchen could be the symbol of resistance and the symbol of survival during the very harsh times. This picture I think you know very well. This is a picture from of the Mariupol Dramatic Theatre, which was before it was bombed by Russians on the 16th of March. And we all seen these signs that there are children being present there. And according to different sources, at the time of the bombing, there could have been from 500 to 800 people hiding in this theater, both in the bomb shelters and in the theater itself. The theater just like the theater we are here. 130 people survived, according to Ukrainian sources. The fate of others is unknown. Some of them, of course, are dead and are buried in a mass grave in the outskirts of Mariupol. And this is a concert played in the front of this ruined theater by Russian occupation administration and Russian occupants. So at the beginning of September, the Kremlin Symphonic Orchestra performed the Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony there at this concert. I tried to find the names of the musicians, but I could not because the site of the Kremlin Symphonic Orchestra does not provide the names, although there is a conductor's name. His name is Konstantin Chudnovsky, and before this year he was also performing in Europe on various, he was conducting concerts on various opera and classic music festivals. But now I didn't find any evidence of him participating in such concerts, but unfortunately I can presume that there could be, because, for example, Valery Gergiev, who is also a Russian conductor, a very famous one, for example, this year he was fired from the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra, but in the nearest future he has a very busy schedule. He as Blyzinsky and his Blyzinsky Orchestra has concerts in Paris, for example, and in Germany, with Gergiev supporting Putin's politics, supporting the war, signing the letters in support for the war, and he has the concerts. So I actually, unfortunately, have no doubt that this guy will also be the star of the classical scene in Europe. And also, of course, there's not only Chudnovsky, but I wonder how Tchaikovsky's music could be played right now. So at the same time, when his music is being played on the ruins of the theater in the occupied city, there are also plenty of concerts in different philharmonies all over the world with the music of Tchaikovsky, because Tchaikovsky is considered apparently a very important figure without which the classical scene is impossible, I think. I don't know what will happen if someone could live like a year without music of Tchaikovsky. And I wonder who decides that, and who decides what to put in the repertoires. Who decides why? What are the ethical premises? Do these people understand the weirdness that I'm trying to channel right now? So is it is it okay for them? How do they feel knowing these facts? And of course, there is a lot of more cases, such as this one. For example, this. This is the billboard with a billboard put on in an occupied Kherson, which is on the south, in the south of Ukraine. So there is a portrait of Alexander Pushkin and a very vague explanation of how he is connected to the city. So whenever Russians come and occupy the territory, they try to establish this connection to the Russian identity, whatever that is, and they try to enable this myth. So Pushkin is one of the figures and one of the instruments that is being constantly used. The monuments of Pushkin, billboards with Pushkin, Pushkin is everywhere. And I think it's needless to say that Kherson has much more deeper history than the imperial history that the occupiers are referring to. So Kherson has a very complicated and deep identity, and I think it is to be unfolded, of course, after the war is over. And the last case to represent is not connected to Ukraine directly, but connected to Italy, where we are now. So this is the portrait of a young woman by Tetyana, which was brought from Hermitage Museum to the exhibition I think, to Palazzo Reale in Milan, and among with dozens of other paintings brought to this exhibition and to another exhibition in Galleria d'Italia. And this year in March, before the exhibitions ended, Hermitage asked these museums to give back the paintings that were given to them, to these museums, and they actually agreed, because Hermitage concerns are that after the full-scale invasion, the sanctions began to be more wide and more deep, and they were afraid that they will not receive these paintings. But they received it back, and actually they are very proud of it. And the interesting fact, actually, connected to Ukraine is, while the Italian museums returned the paintings after the exhibition ended, because there was some agreement and everyone was happy about it, apparently. But for example, the objects from the Crimean museums in 2014 that were on the exhibition in Amsterdam, and the exhibition was also during the start of the occupation of Crimea, and when the exhibition ended in 2014, Ukraine claimed back these objects because Crimea is a part of Ukraine, but store these objects on the Crimean Peninsula was not safe, so the Kyiv authorities claimed these back. And Amsterdam Museum refused to do so because they saw some kind of ambiguity in this. So for now, these objects, the so-called Scythian gold, is still in Amsterdam because there are some judicial processes, there are courts that are very, very long process of giving Ukraine back its heritage, apparently. So when it comes to Russia, everyone gives back like this. When it comes to Ukraine, please go to court, which is also very expensive, takes a long time, something. So, and I wonder what will going to be next, because in Hermitage, I think maybe you know already, there was a very interesting interview given by the director of Hermitage, Piotrovsky, who said that all their exhibitions that they have abroad are just a powerful cultural offensive. If you want a kind of special operation, which a lot of people don't like, but we are coming, he said, and no one can be allowed to interfere with our offensive. Well, I wonder what museum will cooperate with the Hermitage first after this interview, because I'm a pessimist, and I think that, like with Gergiev and like with classical music and great Russian dancers and conductors and musicians, this cooperation, or rather, I would say collaboration, will continue. And as far as this was a very outrageous interview, also, I think published in an art newspaper, or just fragments were published there, I don't believe that Hermitage would be banned from cooperation with big Russian museums. But still, what I wanted to emphasize is that this is not only about Piotrovsky, or about Pushkin, or about Gergiev, or about this guy, this Russian soldier who made a book deal out of his war crimes in Ukraine. He wrote a book, and now he is published in Paris, in France, instead of being in the court and giving some and being persecuted for the crimes that he did. So I think that what is really important for me now is that to talk about these injustices that actually allow this to happen. And these are the structural injustices that have been taking place for centuries, actually. And these injustices and these special structures led us and led, I think, the Western world to centralize the whole region, whatever you can call it, like post-Soviet, Eastern Europe, and we can invent a new name, but this region is now being centralized still to the ex-metropolis, to Russia and Moscow. And I think that the recent Nobel Peace Prize actually also illustrates that, and its decision and its statement that was explaining this decision. I think we can elaborate on that, and maybe we will discuss that later, but this is a very illustrative thing that says to us that Western Europe and Western European institutions, the Nobel Institute, I don't know, the museums, some film festivals are not separating Russia, for example, and does not think of every single country in the Eastern Europe, in the post-Soviet territory, as an agent, as a subject. And someone makes these decisions, someone writes these statements. There is a human being who wrote this statement that these year laureates have revitalized and honored Alfred Nobel's vision of peace and fraternity between nations, a vision most needed in the world today. So someone wrote it. Someone thinks that a vision most needed is a generalization you can do in October 2022, after the 7 months of big war in Ukraine. So I think, and this is maybe the result of these 12 years of writing and some years of reflecting upon the war and this after 2014 experience in Ukraine. I think that this is very important for us together to think who are the watchmen, who are the gatekeepers, and what is this precise moment that the people who are curating, arranging, allowing, managing, what is the precise moment when they become gatekeepers and when then they start reflecting on their privilege, on their position, and start doing as usual. What is usual? What are the structures? Why are they there? Why do we agree with that? How do we proceed? Are we okay with that? Because I'm not sure actually. And I believe that this is a result of thinking of culture as an object, and culture pieces and art pieces as some objects that are somewhere there, that should be hanging on the wall, sold, I don't know, brought to the museum, explained, colonized in a way. And start to allow ourselves to think that culture is not only these beautiful things that allows something, that saves someone. I understand that this is a very outrageous statement, because this Biennale, for example, allows a lot of experience, and this beautiful exhibition that we all have seen allows these different experiences to unfold, to be legitimate in the world, and this Biennale allows to do it. But I think that if we go deeper, if we talk to the artists, if we, I don't know, maybe someone, I think that always there is something to criticize for, yes, and always there is someone who is underrepresented. But culture is more than that, unfortunately. Culture could be very toxic. Culture could kill. Culture could be instrumentalized. And this is what we are being discussing for quite a while in Ukraine, and that's what we are feeling now. The results are here. This rocket that destroyed the Zaporizhzhia home, this 3 a.m, is the result of culture's unreflectiveness, culture losing its critical moment, its self-reflecting. That people who do this culture, who make it possible, forget why they are there in the first place. This is what I feel is going on the big festivals. For example, Cannes Film Festival and their celebration of Kirill Serebrenikov's films, for example. This is what I feel when I read the statement of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, where the Ukrainian winner is being described with this small paragraph. They didn't even make their research to unfold, because the organization of Sasha Mikvichuk, who I'm very proud to know, is so much more than this paragraph. And they didn't do that. I don't know why. Well, I have some assumptions, but I think it's just speculations. Well, I think that we could start, maybe we have started already, of course. And it is very exciting to think about how the big institutions, these gatekeepers, these people who legitimate stuff, who make this canon, who make the hierarchies, could stop doing that, and how the hierarchies don't work anymore, and how we can dismantle the structure and invent something new without losing the core, without losing the people's connections, people's lives. And I think that the great lesson from these few cases could be, for example, that we start treating culture as a subject, as a very vivid and alive organism that could be everything, and very dependable on people's connections and on these characteristics that we put in these connections. So I think the more we question ourselves about the decisions we make, about the people we talk to, about the language we speak and words we use, the more we can evolve this new structure, maybe it would be unstructured, yes, of culture, and maybe we could bring more to that, to make it more horizontal, and to make this decolonization not only these angry words that everyone is using, and I think a lot of people are being tired of, but this is decolonizing ethically, not only geographically, and not only like formally. This decolonization is very needed, and I hope that these images are the illustrations of that. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dash, for this insightful lecture, which really evokes many questions, and I do hope we will have a chance to continue exploring them. But before we jump into the discussion, I would like to ask the audience if you want to ask any questions to Daria, to her lecture. I can hardly see you, unfortunately, because of the lights, but if you have a question, please raise your hand and speak in the microphone. There is a question too? Yeah, yes, please.
Hi, Dasha. I'm from Ukraine. I'm Nastya. And one of the most important questions I put myself in, how to convince people they can live without Tchaikovsky and without other culture, people of Russian history. Because now we understand it's not that important, and Russians use it as weapon against of people, against of Ukrainians, against of humanity. What do you think?
How do they stop?
How to convince them that they can wait, and it's not appropriate to listen to them, to use them, to emphasize them, to, I don't know, emphasize them in the culture and everywhere.
Oh, yeah, that's a big question that we've been discussing like for, I don't know, for 7 months, also with the representatives of Ukrainian Institute, with people who are into cultural diplomacy and who are into the movement of reconsideration the Russian culture here and elsewhere. I don't know how to convince, but I think these small talks, like personal discussions, personal involvement works. I don't know, showing and not judging, maybe, like, because people don't like to be wrong, and I believe that this hierarchy and this structure of this greatness of Russian culture is like almost one of the last hierarchy here, because everything is falling apart, all the structures. So, fortunately, yes, and everything is changing, and people sense that, and maybe this is like the last frontier of the old life. So I feel, and this is very painful to switch to something else. We are more ready to this because we are from Ukraine, and in Ukraine everything is changing constantly, not even during the war, but the nature of connections is such. But I don't know, I believe in these small personal conversations and asking also why, and asking the position, why is it so important, and proposing the positive program. Okay, you like Tchaikovsky. Okay, maybe there is. Let's dive into Ukrainian classical and academic music. Maybe you can play these pieces, these composers, because this is also important. You are so it's I think it's manipulation plus tolerance, and plus big understanding that this logic that they have with the admiration of Tchaikovsky and Pushkin and Bulgakov, and this is a huge list, has been built for centuries. Russia was throwing a lot of money for centuries. This is what happened. And this is not like dismantled in a day. So I believe in these small grassroots things actually. But I think big angry letters also work, and I think Tanya could elaborate on that. Or combining all that, and also being being rational maybe, and proposing these some decisions, some programs. Okay, we have this and this and this instead of this and this and this, not just cancel everything. So there is so much more, and also which I think could be the next steps is, of course, widening this geography and concentrating not only on Ukraine, but concentrating on the Eastern Europe, on Balkan countries, on Baltic countries, on Poland, and of course, Central Asia and Caucasus, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. They are our allies, and we can together shift this hierarchy, because there are a lot of people with great amount of stories, and yesterday we saw one of these, and this is just a glimpse of it. It's so much more, and I think this is very exciting, and this excitement could be shown. So okay, maybe let's dive into something new, and this could be contagious, in a good way.
I can only add to this that I think this idea that people cannot survive without Tchaikovsky is based on the presumption that art is always good, and it's kind of always plays the good role, but it's not. And the idea is that art can also kill, and Russian art is part of Russian imperial project. And after Russian tanks come, then they bring Pushkin and Dostoevsky with them, and Tchaikovsky as well. And Dasha just proved that with her cases. And I just wanted to add to that during the full-scale invasion, just I think a month ago, Putin signed a new decree. It's the national program of developing the cultural relations of Russia abroad, so like bringing cultural Russia outside of the country in the middle of like these international sanctions and everything. So he actually pays attention to this issue, and he gives his time to sign this humanitarian policy of Russia abroad. And it says there that we invest in bringing out the famous Russian cultural people, cultural figures, as like the prominent figures, and he actually names them. And Tchaikovsky, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy are among them. So you can open the Kremlin website and see actually what are the main figures that Russia sees as their cultural weapon to the world. So also using these arguments in your conversation can help convince people, because this is just so straightforward, considering what the director of Hermitage told and how the government of Russia treats these cultural questions, cultural issues at this moment. Other questions? I think I saw another hand. Just a second, please. Could you wait for the microphone, because... I agree with you. Okay, thank you. Okay, then we will then move on to our discussion and further deep into the question. And I would like to invite to join us on this stage Furqat Palvan-Zade, independent curator and researcher and filmmaker. We watched a rough cut of Furqat's film yesterday. And Lia Dostleva, artist and cultural anthropologist and essayist from Ukraine. And Maria Blyzinsky, heritage consultant and independent curator, Curator Emeritus at the Royal Museums of Greenwich from the United Kingdom. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for dedicating your time to this event. We will talk more about the relationship between art and war in the aspect of decoloniality and how it's handled after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and what this invasion, what this current war actually shows, what it highlights in the cultural sphere. Before we dive into the conversation, I would like to ask you give your statements, your short presentations, and I would like to invite Lia to begin. Please.
Hi, everyone. May I have my presentation, please? Yeah. So this project I will be talking about somehow became kind of our statement project because it shows how art can deal with war, but as you will see, it also shows how art can fail to deal with war and with war trauma. So it's called Licking War Wounds, and it was created together with my co-author Lia Dostleva. And the thing you see here is a salt lamp in the shape of a tank. Can you show the next slide, please? Okay. I can control it now. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I was so bad with it. Yeah, so I hope you're familiar with the concept of salt lamp. It's basically a solid piece of salt on a wooden base with a lamp inside. You can decorate your apartment with it, and it's nice, it's cozy, and also it's believed to have some healing abilities or something like that. I mean, it's a super nice thing. It's very nice to have it. It's a good present. And in a part of Eastern Ukraine I'm from, it's a widespread souvenir because local craftsmen have been producing this type of salt lamps for ages. They've been present as far as I remember myself. And then the war came, and in Bakhmut, people started to produce such lamps in the shape of tank. I mean, so this nice and cozy object turns to be a war machine. And when we discovered that, a friend of mine sent us a photo. We asked him to buy it. And while we were waiting to this salt lamp to arrive, we started to think what we can do to that as artists. What kind of gesture will be appropriate? And we were like, okay, it's salt. What we can do to salt, we lick it, right? Animals lick salt. But also, it's obviously an embodiment of a war wound. What we do to wounds, we lick it. So we decided to lick it until it disappears. And we started to do that. Yeah, so every picture you see here stands for 1 week of licking. Yeah, so basically 1 row is a month. So we started to do that. I mean, when we came up with this idea, we never see a real thing. We only saw a photo. So we thought it would be small. And then the tank has arrived, and it appeared to be 3 times bigger than we imagined it. And I mean, it's also a very symbolic thing, because when you think of it as of war wound, of a trauma, how could you understand how big is it? So, okay, we started, and it will be for this for a while. Spoiler, it took us 4.5 years to complete everything. We started at the end of 2016. And it's almost over, but now it's over completely. And we finished this last summer in July 2021. And for the short period of time, we were kind of proud of ourselves. Because, I mean, it's a good project, we thought. It's nice to be authors of something like that, because it was, you know, about optimism, about how the war ends, how the trauma ends. And we started to work on a book. And, I mean, you know that then the war started, I mean, again, on a very different scale. And also, while we were like working on it, I mean, Ukrainian Earth community is a small club. I know, you know, when you are like around for years, everyone knows everyone. So like people started to say, oh, I know you are these two crazy people with a salt lamp, and you are licking it. But it's a good thing, I think. When you will finish, the war would stop. And you know, nothing happened. Okay, we completed this project, and war started again in a very different scale. So, I mean, for me, it's somehow kind of also very, like, telling, very symbolic thing that, you know, like an artist, sometimes it's very hard to predict what will happen. I mean, now, could we even, like, estimate this point, how big it will be? What, I mean, is it possibly, could be leaked, you know? How could we talk about it? What do we do? I mean, it's still happening. So there is, I don't know, no tank to leak because it's still in progress. It's still in progress of creating, yeah. So, and also, you know, it's very interesting is, like, getting back to this topic of decolonization, it's very interesting how, like, people perceive it. Because for the last time, I think I was talking about this project with some German person who is, like, was working in some super, like, established institution, art institution, and he was like, okay, yeah, you know, it's a good project, I get it, but what do you do now? Do you start it to leak salt Putin or something? Ha, 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 you know. So it's, I mean, it's also like getting back to this topic of understanding, of decolonization. I mean, probably for him it was appropriate thing to ask, but, you know, I was like, no, you know, okay, we didn't, you know, we actually didn't. I actually do not work with trauma, with war topic for a moment, because I don't know what to say. I don't know if I have even a right to say about this war something, because I'm not living now in Ukraine. I'm like naturally part of this cultural field and like discursive field, but I'm not in the situation. So why would I work with it now? You know, I've been so privileged to lost everything like 8 years ago. Now I'm just fine. I mean, I'm in a position to help other people, not to reflect on, you know, my own trauma, because it's also, which is very telling. Also, this project is frequently perceived as my personal trauma. I mean, how it's personal? At some level, of course it is, because it's my way to work, our way to work, that we are like using this personal experience as kind of access point. So you are not appropriating someone else's voice. You are talking like from your position, but with some critical distance. But I mean, it's not something super personal, something super emotional. I mean, maybe now I sound too emotional, but it's not because I'm traumatized. It's just the way I talk. I mean, it's how I am. So yeah, but maybe I will stop here and we will get back to this topic later. Thank you.
Doesn't work? Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Lia. And yeah, I just want to say that there is a catalog which was released, I think, just before the invasion started. And it's also a beautiful book about this project. Maria, I would like to ask you to give your statement and your feedback. Yes, sure, of course. And please.
Thanks, Tetyana. So thank you. I'd like to thank the Ukrainian Institute and to the Ukrainian Pavilion in Venice for inviting me today. It's an honor to be here. I should probably explain why I'm here. I'm a UK-based curator, an independent curator, but I'm also Anglo-Ukrainian. My father was Ukrainian. He fought during the Second World War for the Ukrainian independence. So although my mother is English and I grew up in the UK, I understand a lot more about Ukraine than typical English people, or typical British people. So I've had a whole career working in the cultural sector, and today when I mention museums, if I refer to museums, I'm talking about the cultural sector as a whole. I'm talking about museums in the broadest sense, so galleries, archives, libraries, and so on. And when Tetyana invited me to talk today, we had a conversation about what kinds of things could I bring to the conversation, what kinds of things we might talk about. And that's what the slides are about today. Just 4 slides that may bring some thoughts and ideas to the conversation. So although most of my work in museums has been to do with exhibitions in general, a lot of my work, especially recently, has been around working with organizations in post-conflict situations and thinking about what museums, what cultural heritage can do in that situation. How can we help? And with the war on Ukraine, of course, that means that it's brought back so much closer to me. What can I do as a professional? What can people who work in museums, galleries, and so on, what can we do to support what's going on at the moment? So the first question that we talked about was, why is war represented in museums? And as we've heard, there's a deep human need to make sense of what's happening, to share knowledge, to understand and learn, especially when situations are chaotic, unknown, and difficult to experience. And that's not just for current situations, it's for history as well. And museums, of course, cover all of human experience in all of its diversity and all of its messiness, the good and the bad. And artifacts, we use artifacts to tell those stories and to keep memories alive. The topics may be difficult, but museums create a safe space to reflect and learn. And this also leads to the issue of whose story is being told. And that's one of the things that's already been touched on many times today already. The same artifacts can be used to convey, challenge, or change a narrative depending on point of view. So this image here is from the Imperial War Museum in London. It's from their recently opened Second World War gallery. I didn't work on this gallery, but I did work on their First World War gallery. And one of the things that came out of that was, this was back in 2014, it opened, the centenary of the First World War. And one of the things that really struck the museum at that point was that it was the first time they were conveying the story of the First World War when British veterans who fought in the war were no longer alive. And so their whole audience was based on people who didn't have lived experience of fighting, of combat in that war. And I think that's one of the important things about the Second World War gallery as well, and museums in general. It's always thinking about who's your audience, who are you talking to, and why are you talking to them. The Imperial War Museum wouldn't necessarily think of itself as a military museum, it thinks of itself more as a social history museum. So it's looking at more as, not less as a monument to military glory, but more as a record of the toil and the sacrifice of those who served in uniform or worked on the home front. And it's well documented that trauma is generational. It passes through families, it passes through generations. And so that's another reason that we represent war in museums, to tell the stories and to keep those memories alive. My second slide is a much more recent event. It represents one of the darkest days of the early 21st century, so the terrorism attacks on New York and elsewhere in the USA on the 11th of September 2001. And this is from the museum, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum in New York, which was opened in 2014. So that's actually 13 years after the attacks. And this museum represents a single day in history. In retrospect, the displays also deal with the lead-up and the legacy of that day, but they use artifacts to make sense of that day. The planning for the museum obviously started a long time before it opened, and the collection of objects actually began practically immediately by local museums, by local communities, and so on. And I'd like to read a little bit from a speech that was given in April 2002 by the New Jersey Historical Society. So essentially they recognized the need to fulfill a purpose as heritage professionals and to engage with the local communities. And this is what they said. Soon after the attacks, public memorials began appearing around the state. While they were a crucial element of our human reaction to loss, they were also fugitive. People tucked memorials near train stops, along residential streets, near the Port Authority office and the PATH train, places along the many routes of travel where loved ones had last been seen. So we decided we would begin a collecting project, even before we knew what that would entail. We turned to photography to document those memorials without interfering with their purpose. So they recognized their professional skills and their professional duty to create a framework for understanding the impact of what had just happened. And they also understood the importance of ethical collecting. They didn't want to interfere with those personal tributes that were being put out in the street, but they wanted to record them in other ways. And so perhaps by growing organically over time, and then eventually those collections became part of the 9/11 Museum, it meant that they were able to work with communities to ensure that the interpretation that was given around the topic was sensitively presented. So my third slide, this is about people trust museums and libraries, and this is about an Ipsos research. So Ipsos is a market research company that's based in London in England, and it dates from the 1970s. And the Ipsos Veracity Index is a poll. It's the longest running poll on trust in professions in Britain, and it's been running consistently since 1983. The 24th edition in 2021 reveals that librarians and curators are among Britain's most trusted professions, ranking alongside doctors and nurses. I'd like to think that in other countries, this is a similar result would be found as well. But I think as well, it points to a responsibility, a professional responsibility to maintain that trust. It's important to remain independent. It's important for many voices to be heard as well. It also links to the Code of Ethics for Museums. The ICOM, the International Council of Museums, has its own code of ethics. Individual museums have codes of ethics as well, which cover everything from staff behaviour and governance, of course, to the acquisition of collections, culturally sensitive material and the care of collections, and how objects are displayed. So museums should ensure that the information they present in displays and exhibitions is well-founded, accurate, gives appropriate consideration to represented groups and beliefs. The important thing here is about the professional duty and skills coming into play. People look to museums for accurate information, especially this is important during times during the era of fake news, when it's difficult to find out what is true and what not. And of course, regimes can take advantage of this position, and the present deliberate propaganda, as has well been documented in Russia, where museums have been used as a propaganda tool to support the war on Ukraine. And finally, some thoughts about contemporary collecting during a crisis. And by crisis, of course, today's topic is about the war in Ukraine, but it could equally refer to crises such as the recent pandemic. And I think one of the things here professionally is that we need to think about how to look after ourselves as professionals, as curators, and how to present difficult information to the public, and also how to care for our audiences, and especially if we're interacting with them while we're collecting or while we're trying to make sense of what's going on. The thing about creating exhibitions during or immediately after crises, it can be mentally tough. It often means dealing with traumatic events or meeting people who've been through traumatic or painful experiences. I know that when going back to the Imperial War Museum, when they created their Holocaust exhibition about 20 years ago, the curators there weren't really given very much psychological support, even though they were dealing with and interacting with Holocaust survivors. More recently, as part of the Second World War Gallery, they've redone the interpretation of the Holocaust displays, and that curators there have now been given mental first aid, mental care first aid. It's a much more understood thing, and the importance of mental first aid in museums is becoming recognised as good practice. So obviously, first, protect your own safety and well-being, focus on what you do best. As a professional, think about your professional reason for undertaking certain work. Know yourself when to take a break. How do you manage stress? And second, learn mental first aid practices. Third, be aware of potential triggers in displays. How might people react? How can exhibitions point people towards getting help themselves if they're finding them triggering? But I think the main thing here is that as professionals, we can make a difference. For the purpose of today's event, I think we just need to think about how we can make a difference in relation to the war in Ukraine. The image here that I've chosen is Yoko Ono's artwork, which was displayed worldwide in February and March earlier this year after the start of the full-blown invasion. This is a picture from her artwork, which was on Times Square. It was also displayed in Piccadilly Circus in London. It was also sold as a print to raise funds for Ukrainian, to support Ukraine. So my main point today is that museum professionals, heritage professionals, we do have a role to play, and there is a role that we can play here. Дякую и слава Україна.
Thank you, Maria. And Furqat, I would love to hear your statement today.
Yes, I'll maybe quickly explain that my film is still online, available online, and I think it's directly connected to what we are discussing now, and it was like an exercise in creating a film with artifact as a central protagonist in it, an exercise in telling stories which are hidden in one specific artifact kept in a Western collection. And now I wanted to share my ongoing research and the collection of artifacts that I've found recently in one Uzbek archive, in Kinophoto archive in Tashkent, film archive in Tashkent, and this I hope it will be also developed into a film. So these are the images then during Tashkent Film Festival. Was basically a soft power tool initiated by Moscow in late 50s and early 60s, and it existed till early 90s. And I think it's a great example, it's a great reference that could explain our very complex Soviet and post-Soviet histories, and also how and why Soviet cultural diplomacy used anti-colonial agenda, decolonial agenda, and how and why modern day Russia is trying to do the same thing. So the film festival was focused on showcasing works by Asian, African, and Latin American filmmakers. And it happened every 2 years in Tashkent. And this the anti-colonial agenda was like one of the main topics of this film festival. And when you look at the history of the Soviet project, you see that this idea of the colonization of the world was one of the main ideas of the whole project. Of course, I will not be going into details and explaining what's wrong with that, but they definitely used it. This relevance of this project was proved during our common trip to Documenta and Kassel. There was a very weird meeting organized by Goethe Institute, if you remember, when they organized a meeting of cultural workers from ex-Soviet republics and Africa. And for many of the, for many of us, it was a really surprising kind of a meeting. And this axis, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, Africa, was not really obvious. And some of us even expressed their doubts about the logic behind this encounter. But for me, it was really meaningful because I was already working on this research. And this access for me is very meaningful because of our common colonial history, and this festival tells it in a very interesting way. Of course, it was like a soft power tool and an example of Soviet cultural diplomacy. But as every successful soft power project, it was also working and delivering results and outcomes. So I think there are very interesting questions in this festival that could explain how we could apply post-colonial or decolonial studies in our region, how we could connect the dots and see commonalities and particularities between different parts of the world. So I thought just to maybe quickly zoom out and show some artifacts that can give a glimpse. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you all for your different perspectives, and we have this artistic level and the research, curatorial and critical, and the point of view of the institution towards the topic. So it's interesting how we can put these all experiences and backgrounds together in this conversation. Before I ask my first question, I wanted to refer also to one case that I want to bring on the table in this conversation, and which will follow by the question, actually. 6 years ago, I went to New York and I visited an exhibition of Russian avant-garde in MoMA, And in this exhibition, one of the artworks was by Vasily Ermilov, an artist from Kharkiv, who is the most famous Ukrainian constructivist artist. And it's not the fact that he was referred to as Russian artist in the caption in this museum struck me, but the fact that this artwork was hanging upside down. And I clearly knew that it was hanging upside down because I also have part of my work and part of my career as an art historian, and avant-garde in Ukraine is the topic that I research. And I saw many historical photographs of Vasily Ermilov next to this work. But it's also because when you know Cyrillic alphabet, you can see that the work is the letter B in Cyrillics, because it was dedicated to his friend Boris Kosarev, so B for Boris. So after I saw this work, I went to the museum people immediately and asked them to change it because this was a mistake, and I just explained all the logic and everything. And they were very grateful for my contribution, and they promised to hang it over to the management of the museum. So I waited a couple of months, and I asked a friend of mine who lives in New York if anything changed, and she said no, it's still upside down. So I decided to write an email, and I wrote an email saying that I was there and I left this message, but probably it got lost, so here's the message again. Please hang it the proper way. And I received an auto reply saying that museum is really grateful for helping becoming better, and they will get back to me. And I waited a couple of months, and I had no feedback, and I asked my friend again, and the situation was the same, nothing changed. So from time to time, in these last 6 years, I was sending them emails, and once I even did a real research with photographs and quotes and everything, and I sent it to them. No reply at all. And then after the 24th of February, MoMA created an exhibition which was called In Solidarity, dedicated to Ukraine, and they took all the artworks that were that were created by artists somehow related to Ukraine. They were born, they worked there, some kind of relation, and this was a gallery with all of these artworks. And one representative, one person who works in MoMA, whom I got to know just a few weeks before that, sent me a message asking how I was and how supportive America is with Ukraine, and how they wanted to show their support with this exhibition and making it happen and putting it together. And he sent me some photographs of the exposition, and obviously Vasily Ermilov was hanging upside down there. So when I sent him my gratitude for standing with Ukraine, and just reminding that in the last 6 years I several times asked to change this, to change the way that work was hanging, he replied immediately, like in an hour. I received a reply saying that he was very sorry and he will immediately do something about it. And actually in 12 hours the work was hanging properly. So I think the morale of this story is that somehow for many years and for decades and for even maybe for centuries, Ukraine was not visible and was not heard, and our voice was somehow disappearing and somehow not reaching anyone for different reasons. Maybe we can refer to that. And it took the full-scale invasion and death of thousands of people and devastation of the country in order for the world to finally start hearing Ukraine and Ukrainians and seeing Ukraine literally as the country on the map, as a culture, as the nation that has the right to exist. And so my questions to you would be how this war actually changed the decolonial discourse, or actually the conversation in relation to art and war. So what has changed in the cultural sphere, in museums, in artistic work, in your practices, basically, in relation to this war, and in the context of decoloniality, and how Ukraine is seen and why it wasn't seen before. Who wants to start? Yeah.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. The story about being invisible as a Ukrainian strikes a chord with me. I grew up in the UK having to explain where my name came from, and having to explain that yes, Ukraine was a country in its own right, and it did exist, and yes, it does have its own language and its own culture. So that strikes a huge chord with me. If there's anything positive to come out of the situation at the moment, it's that I no longer have to explain where my name comes from and where Ukraine is on the map and how large it is, considering it's the largest country in Europe as well. So what's happened in the past is terrible. I've come across many of those stories myself as well, of objects being on display and not being explained properly. But I think if anything positive can come out of this, perhaps we're riding a crest of a wave where people are now much more aware of Ukrainian culture, and I think we're pressing on an open door to explain and for people to listen now. I think in the past, perhaps, I can't say what other museums are doing, but maybe in the past the priorities were elsewhere. There are so many priorities with museums, it's hard for them to know what to look at, what to change, and so on. I don't want to make an excuse, but I think now is the time that we can really think about how to really raise awareness of what people can do in their everyday practice. And that's one of the things Tetyana and we're also talking to ICOM UK about a series of talks which is based on small practical things that British curators, British heritage professionals can do in their day-to-day work, which they can think about how to decolonize the story of Ukraine and how to make sure that they're thinking in the right way. In the UK, the story of decolonization, the knowledge of it is it's a very high priority in museums, but the priority has been to do with our own colonial history up until now. So this is a new story, a new way of thinking about decolonization in the UK. And I just think I think now is the time to introduce that as a new perspective, and that people will start to listen.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. So I started to work with trauma in general some 8 years ago when the war started for me, because I'm from Donetsk. Yeah, so it was kind of personal access point, and I was reading books, you know, about trauma. And one of I read a book which is called Empire of Trauma, by two anthropologists, and they, I mean, it's a brilliant book about how trauma become destigmatized in public discourse from this notion of, you know, hysteria or something, and now is perceived as something which could be happening to everyone. Like how this experience of trauma was normalized in public discourse, but also they are talking about mass traumas, and they wrote that Armenia appeared in Western discourse on the Western mental map just in 1988, after this massive earthquake with really tragic consequences, with many victims. And before it was invisible for Western audiences, and this thought really struck me, and it was like a few years before the full-scale invasion. Yeah, and I started to understand this like trauma geography, when some region appears for Western mostly audience when something bad happens there. And before it's like, okay, some people elsewhere are doing something. I mean, this war, like this new iteration of our war, brings massive amount of attention to Ukraine. But I mean, my question is this amount of attention leads to better understanding. Because when we, it's a beautiful phrase, to give a voice to someone, yeah? Institution is given a voice to an artist. Artist is given a voice to some community he works with, right? But okay, now we have this voice. Are we being heard? Because for me, it's not so obvious. If empathy leads to better understanding, So yeah, I probably will stop here.
I agree that there is this tendency of, which is very good, of reconfiguring cultural ties between countries. Because before the war, we obviously, not we, but they, the West, was mainly focused on Moscow and St. Petersburg in organizing ties between the West and the so-called post-Soviet region or Russian culture. And I feel that now it's shifting. And this is a very important and very practical question and we need to push it further and follow up. The way they spend money, the way, for instance, European institutions invest money in this region, it shouldn't be focused in Moscow or St. Petersburg or big Russian cities anymore. They should also look at other Eastern European countries or Central Asian countries, and maybe in general rethink the way they frame the whole region. For instance, you mentioned Russian avant-garde. Why is Russian avant-garde, right? It's a very problematic term. Yeah, so, or in academia, in Western academia, for instance, my country is still studied in Russian and Slavic departments, Uzbekistan, which is very weird. So I think this process is going on now, and we need to push on. And also you mentioned alliances between Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Balkans. Yeah, I think we should follow up and decentralize the whole region, decentralize cultural diplomacy, academic cooperation, etc. And this is a very practical and pragmatic question, and we should work on it further. Yeah.
Well, maybe I will talk more about the film festivals, because I'm looking very closely at them lately, and it's also one of my focuses as being a film critic. So I think that, so obviously, almost every film festival now has a Ukrainian program focused on Ukraine, has Ukrainian panels and industry sections, which are also co-organized by Ukrainian institutes, thanks to these are enormous efforts, and I believe to go through these walls. These are not the doors. So the doors are made right now with these traumas, also with these emotions, with this war. So, but still, I wonder if these panel discussions are really effective, and how do film festivals actually treat it. So it's like it's a very formal way to address the issue. Like, okay, let's make a panel discussion. And what's next? So there is plenty of panel discussions everywhere. And okay, for example, this is a big festival, and there are some, for example, Cannes Film Festival. There were Ukrainian panels, 2 Ukrainian films in the selection. Okay, of course, the Ukrainian Pavilion, which was always there. But does it mean that the film festival actually is going to reconsider its principles, reconsider its structure? For example, invite Ukrainian selectors to the selection committees. So this is the problem, which is not very obvious, because on the biggest Ukrainian international film festivals, as there are in big museums, art museums, there are regional sections of selection committees. And Ukraine obviously is being like on this post-Soviet territory, as it is in, for example, in the Centre Pompidou. It's also like in the post-Soviet, but not the Eastern Europe committees. There's like different groups of people selecting these countries, and Ukraine is being perceived as a post-Soviet country and not the Eastern European country, which is very funny. For example, the fact is that before 2022, there were plenty of Russian selectors at different film festivals. For example, in Venice, a Russian guy was responsible for selecting the films from the region. And obviously Russian films were in priority. So, and then there is the stance that Russian cinema is better because they are being better represented in the film festivals. But this is just the guy who doesn't make other geographies to be represented there. For example, Ukrainian films for a while weren't accepted to the competition because of this guy. And is this an objective thing? So how, this is what I was trying to say. And for now, some structural changes are being made. For example, I think ITFA arranged the list of Ukrainian film critics and curators and film managers that could take part in selection processes in film festivals. But I'm also on this list because I'm co-curating a small film festival in Kyiv, which will be like in 2 weeks. And I haven't received any letter, of course, but I wonder if my colleagues did. I'm afraid not. They are brilliant people. I know some of them are just, but they did not receive any letters of invitation. So I think some shifts are really happening, yes. And for example, there will be panel discussions that I think would be efficient, and not because I co-created them with the Latvian Film Festival in Riga, but I think because Riga hears, and they wanted to make these panels to discuss the shared problems. For example, this will be Baltic countries from representatives, and for example, two people from Ukraine, and we are going to discuss the decolonization of the cinema structures regarding Ukraine, for example, in Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia, and maybe wider. So, and I think that these smaller things are being more efficient because you understand that you are being heard, and maybe next year will be more and more, and this conversation will go on. As for the bigger guys, I'm not sure if it's just an informal thing, and tomorrow something else happens elsewhere, and they will run to, obviously it needs to be addressed too, but do they really dig deep? I'm not sure, but I hope that smaller conversations would change something, because I believe in this network, in this grassroots horizontal thing, because these hierarchies don't work anymore.
And my question would be actually referring to the big hierarchies and big institutions and like the large-scale international organizations and how they are seen in this situation and they are challenged in this situation. And I would like to bring the question of cultural heritage protection on table, and my question probably would be, first of all, to Maria, as she has the most background and experience in this sphere, but everyone else is also very much welcome to comment and think together about it. As Dasha referred to in her lecture, around 1,000 objects have been destroyed or disappeared or ruined in the past 7 months. Many more within the past 8 years on the occupied territories. And I'm following the news from the Hermitage on Telegram channel and making screenshots for the future court cases, because I'm sure they have to be taken responsible for all their crimes. So on the last day of archaeologists, they were happy to announce that they have taken 5 million objects of archaeological objects from Crimea to mainland Russia and brought them into different museums, and they are probably forever lost for Ukrainian culture and Crimean culture, and I imagine many of them relate to Crimean Tatar culture and identity. Russia is still on UNESCO. Russia is still in ICOM. How that can happen? I mean, why do we then need ICOM and UNESCO? What is their role in this situation when they cannot not only protect, but even kind of react to this situation?
Where to start? Russia is also on the United Nations. I don't think there's a quick answer. If there was, it would have been resolved already. But I think as professionals, we need to think about what can we do to prevent or minimize the impact. One of those things is that ICOM, again, works on, produces the red list for different areas, which helps to raise awareness of cultural heritage that may be looted and may be being sold on the black market elsewhere, and it helps museums in different countries or customs officials, border officials in different countries to understand the kinds of objects to look out for. It's not a solution, but it helps, and I think it's all part of that raising awareness, which is part of what needs to be done. Using the destruction of art, the destruction of culture, has always been used as a weapon in war. It's not new. It's not a new approach. But I think what's different here is that perhaps this is the first war, especially in the West, which has been shown so much on social media, on the news, and it just seems so immediate for everybody. So I think that there's much more of an awareness that perhaps there hasn't been elsewhere, and also it's a European country. So immediately, especially in the West, you're looking at people that you think, this could be us, it's on our doorstep, these are people like us. So it stops that othering of different cultures. As to why Russia is still on those committees, I don't know how to answer that, but I think specifically this war has revealed that is a problem, and that needs to be addressed in the longer term, and not just for UNESCO, not just for ICOM, not just for the United Nations. I'm sure that there are other areas there as well that need to be unpicked.
Well, I would add my perspective, because I've been focusing on this topic too, like for the latest month, because I was interviewing the Ukrainian museum workers for the project, one of the projects to make a policy paper about Ukrainian heritage protection system, and I wrote an article in Oscar Europa issue, which is going to be published now, about that, because this is a very interesting topic and very painful one too, because a lot of Ukrainian museums failed to evacuate. Also because of lack of instructions provided by Ministry of Culture, unfortunately. Some of them could not manage to do that because the occupation Russian forces came very quickly. For example, in Melitopol, just like in 2 days they were there. So it's a lot to process, but about these great organizations, of course there is a lot of bitterness towards them, because the main thing that they could be criticized for, that they don't have the mechanism of punishing ones who are violating the protocols which were signed and ratified, this second Hague Protocol and the conventions of 1972, I guess. So it's all this stuff with looting archaeological objects are obviously a violation of that such a law, international law in the heritage protection system, which Russia signed to follow, and it fails to do so. And the problem is that these organizations simply do not have the mechanism to punish them. So to exclude Russia from the UNESCO, you have to exclude Russia from the UN. It means to rewrite the UN's constitution, which is, we can understand how hard could it be, because this is a very huge bureaucracy machine. And I think it's also the very big, elephant in the room, and maybe no one wants to look at it because it's very painful to do. I think that all these organizations, which also do good, so they provide instructions, they provide materials, they provide financing, they provide some legitimization of the process. So there are positive cases in Beirut, for example, and after this massive explosion in the port. And I think that because of these organizations, they were created after the war, after the Second World War, and the main assumption was we all are at the same table and we all agree that this will never happen again. That's how it started, and no one. And I think it would be very difficult to say, okay, but let's put this in to prevent something, and maybe we are going to sign this, but you are suspicious one. Maybe you could fail, so let's, or me, or someone else, and let's put something that would punish us. No one puts that. So no one, because it would mean to undermine this collective approach and collective intention. So that's maybe I must, and this is a very fundamental one. So in order to unfold that, to make justice now, we should address that this principle was that the principle failed, that you couldn't have trust because Russia, for example, which signed, which is in the UN, yes? So it's a complicated process, and it's also a matter of trust, and a matter of who do you trust in the future? Can you sign a paper? Is it worth, all these papers, are they worth something? And this is the main principle, how to do that, how to make them worthwhile, how to make them efficient. So, but obviously there is also, but these organizations are with people. People work there, and these people could be convinced, could be, I don't know, could face these difficult situations. For example, these people who write the statements, who make, I don't know, who pick up their phones, who read the letters about the painting. This is ridiculous. You are one of the biggest, one of the main art institutions in the world, and you have a big work upside down. This is like, I don't know, it's like articulate film, I don't know. So, and but I think that maybe these people connections would work anyway. But for now, and some of them do, and people start to prepare. And you call someone you know, and someone calls anyone, and so, and the bigger thing also is that with all the presence of the UNESCO and ICOM, with all these instructions, as far as I know, maybe I'm wrong, there is only one country that is prepared to what Ukraine faced. It's South Korea, because they have drills, they have instructions, they are prepared. No one else is. Despite being on the committees, on the UNESCO, on the museum trainings and something else, no one is. And I think this is a big start a big conversation how to be prepared and not to ruin this vital energy, because you cannot be just mobilized and prepared and paranoid and something. So it's a big question. It's a big question of how the fundamental thing of trust is ruined on the very, very global level. I think it's a very big thing to digest.
I will allow myself to refer to what you said, because I would like to promote a book of Serhiy Plokhy named Yalta, about the conference after the World War II, which set the international security system. And ironically, you know, this setting of the international security was agreed on and set in Yalta in Crimea, and this is where it started to fail and fall apart now. And in that wonderful historical research, Serhiy explains that creating a United Nations was a compromised on each of the sides. And it was an attempt to set peace for at least 50 years, meaning in the lifetime of those who signed it, in the lifetime of those who actually created the system, and maybe their children. So basically there were three people, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, who negotiated and who gave something out of this compromise, because neither of them could fully agree on everything. But they wanted to settle some time for peace to prepare for the next wars, because, you know, the World War II devastated economics so much that neither of the huge powers were able to protect themselves from another war in at least 5 decades. So, and the 5 decades passed, and this international system collapsed because there were superpowers ready again to fight the world war. So, I mean, this is something that we really have to be aware of, that we have to reinvent the international security system. And otherwise, and I mean, we must do it, because the number of wars are already predicted by, I think, all historians, politicians, futurologists, etc. They say that this is just the beginning. The Russian invasion of Ukraine can just start a series of wars that will just, you know, cover the whole world, the whole earth, and that can be the last, actually, war on earth.
Yeah, I think it's important to also say that the current international security system is very Eurocentric. And before that, of course, historically, if you see, every major war in Europe ended up in reconfiguring and relaunching security systems worldwide. This happened after the First World War, Second World War. Before that, every major war resulted in rethinking the whole system. And I'm pretty sure it will happen again after this war. And to the question why Russia is still in UNESCO, well, because Russia is a founding member of the UN, which is now we are doubting whether it was a wise decision to appoint Russia the only successor of the USSR. Yeah, we are doubting it, and I think those doubts will also result in very specific negotiations after this war, and obviously Europe and the whole world will have to reform the UN system, and Russia's role will be different, I think. Yeah.
Well, legally, I have to recall now our representative in the United Nations, Serhiy Kislitsa. Actually, Russia never entered and never was founding member. It was the Soviet Union and the Soviet Ukraine and Soviet Belarus. Yeah, so I mean, the country that was a founding member no longer exists. That's the that could be a solution to that issue also.
I would make like a small thing that I like how we push from the art objects, art projects, and museums to the biggest questions. And this proves that these are the same conversation. This is not like a separate conversation taking place elsewhere. This conversation is going on, it is one big discussion. It's not, it's so intertwined. And I think the more we, the more aware we'll be, and everyone, the more culture will be, the more, how this, its role will grow. And it will be held more responsible for what it does, because it does so many different things. So I like how we expand and how we tangle these different perspectives, which is also only one thing.
Maybe just a short comment. This war has revealed many things. That international security protocols do not work, that international organizations do not work, that collective agreements do not work, that the very slogan "never again" has expired, as we can see. And I think that the theoretical framework which has been developed after the Second World War in response of this massive amount of tragic events which had happened, Holocaust and fascism as well, we have to rethink it. Like again, the whole body of knowledge is not working anymore, because we can see how this very big parts of this body of knowledge, how they are weaponized and instrumentalized in order to defend this privileged world. Yeah, we can see, when after the 24th of February, I honestly expected that, the so-called collective West, or the so-called Westerners, they would understand what's happening, because, it's so very obvious what's going on. But instead, we have this abstract pacifism, that we have seen these letters signed by feminists. Please do not give weapons to Ukraine. It's just absurd thing if you think about it. You are trained to be sensitive. You are trained to see this dynamic of power, and you just fail to see this. Of course, I'm not talking about feminists, I'm talking about the whole Western body of knowledge. It just fails. It doesn't help. So we have somehow to rethink, how do we make it work?
Thank you so much. Before we have to wrap up and make our closing remarks, I would like to give some light into the audience and wake them up a little bit and ask them for questions. Can we please have some light? And please raise your hand if you want to ask something or you want to reflect, share your thoughts. Thanks. Yes, please, but please just talk when you have the microphone, so that you can be heard also for our online audience.
Thank you very much. You're very frustrated, and so are we all. But I'd like to remind you that these poor things have been happening before in the name of colonialism. And now they are happening in the name of capitalism. And that's why Russia can do anything it wants, because other countries profit from it in a way. Why does it sell gas and oil still to countries? And all of that. That's the big picture. I'm sorry.
Oh, I don't know, it's a big question. I don't know why. Why do they buy it? What should happen to stop? So, on the one hand, we understand that the world is collapsing and these epistemological systems are not working, and some collective agreements are not working. But at the same time, there are some agreements. Maybe they are not very public, but there are. There is some status quo that being guarded. And this status quo allows allows countries to buy gas from Russia, and allowed, for example, yesterday Daria showed this big infographic about how Western European countries have been selling weapons to Russia since 2015, when the war was already in Ukraine, and they sold weapons to them. And now they're just, really? Just like, and this is, but this is what we're dealing with, and we should know that these are very fundamental, maybe fundamental things, and we should be prepared for it also. Yes, because greediness is also here, and the war in Ukraine adds to the so many unjust systems that are already here. But I think maybe, and I think we believe, and maybe I believe personally, that this could be like the last breath of this old system, and maybe something could be changed, because this is too much, and we can reinvent it.
Yeah, getting back to our topic of decoloniality, I mean, this war is colonial. I mean, it's super colonial thing if you look at the bigger picture. It can be explained in these terms, and Timothy Snyder actually wrote a piece called "This is Colonial War." I mean, also, of course, capitalism is here, but still, the bigger picture is still colonial framework. It's never gone, it's here.
I also think that the war reveals, it's undermined the whole question of trust. Trust between countries, trust between organizations. And it's revealed a huge crack there that needs to be thought about. And that's a question that I think perhaps before was too big to even consider. Who do we trust?
Any other questions? Do we have questions from our online audience? Okay. Then I would suggest, as this is the closing panel of the 2 days conference, I would suggest that we make final remarks on what are our takeaways from this event, what are the main points that you will bring into your practices, your further activities, what was useful, what will you bring from this event?
Thank you. What to introduce to our day-to-day practices as curators, as heritage professionals? I think that's a question that I've been asking myself, especially since the start of this war, since the start of the full-blown war. But interestingly, I think in the UK, the question is being asked of museum professionals are asking that of themselves as well. And I think that that's a positive thing that we need to take advantage of, and to think of ways to identify what people can introduce to their day-to-day practices that's not overwhelming, because this whole war is, of course, an overwhelming thing. Trauma is overwhelming. So I think we need to think of how to break it down practically into manageable actions, things that, as Daria mentioned as well, making sure that there's a list of people that can be included on international panels, making sure that there are no excuses for mixing up Ukraine, Russia, the Soviet Union, and not assuming that Russia means the Soviet Union as well. I think it's also thinking about the language, how is language used, and raising awareness of that. I think that there will be people now are aware of that as an issue, but they don't necessarily know how to take it forward. So maybe the next thing is that we need to think about practical ways to take that forward.
I really liked Dasha's remark about grassroots initiatives and networking. I mean, it's super practical, and it gives me hope that actually some impact could be done, something could happen. Yeah, and after we finish, I'm going to ask Furqat some things I really want to know. So yes, it's been very productive for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree that we should try to stay focused on like continuous communication, collaboration, conversation, so we don't just leave and forget about this conference. We stay in touch on this personal level. But for myself, yeah, I agree that I would ask myself to stay focused on very practical, pragmatic issues. Ask for decolonization not in this abstract way, but on a very pragmatic way. So I think that's important. Apart from using this practice in art or whatever, yeah, I think now it's important to be very focused on action and deliverables and pragmatic issues. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I would also stick to these personal levels, because when we look at the bigger picture, well, this is a very pessimistic picture, and you start to be more aware of how the world is messed up. And this actually makes you want to stop doing anything. It's not the case. We should not. We should continue to live, continue to talk, continue to not talk, maybe to someone and something else. So I think it is really, so taking part in such conferences and means going out from their bubble, because also these, as I also mentioned yesterday, these experience of being in this big traumatizing event isolates you very much, because you are being encapsulated, you close. And here is more safe space, and you can be more open, and you hear more actually, and you perceive more, which is I appreciate this experience, and thank you for inviting and for arranging this. So stay open and stay open and maintain this dialogue is crucial. And this dialogue, not like this abstract dialogue from between the colony and the metropole and for something, but dialogue on the other level and of the other character, of another quality. This is much more to the raw dialogue is being compromised, unfortunately, but still its communication is very important here and on other such panels and discussions. So, and I really would like for us to continue these conversations on many different levels within our personal lives and professional work also. Thank you.
My takeaways would be that in the conversation about art and war, we referred a lot to the notion of land as the resource and the reason for war at one place or at one point, and as a safe place, and a hideaway place to have an opportunity to free imagination. And so imagination would be the second word that we referred mostly to, imagining peace, imagining new world, imagining the future. And I think it's interesting how we refer to the opposite things, while talking to war and speaking about why we need this peace for, and understanding at the same time that this peace might be in the past instead of the future. Maybe the eternal peace does not exist anywhere else except for our imagination. And for me, the color of this whole event would be this Yves Klein blue that we saw in practically all of the presentations, and I will think more about it and will try to explore more about this blue color. And as we're closing, I would like to thank you all. Thank you for participating. Thank you for coming to Venice and contributing your time, your thoughts, your effort to make this conference a vivid and important conversation about what is happening, reflecting and trying to find solutions, even if we cannot actually change the thing, change the outcome of this particular war, because the change is made by the Ukrainian armed forces at the front line. And this is something that's given us the privilege to sit here and talk and, dream and imagine. And I would like to thank my colleagues from the Ukrainian Institute and especially Lesa Bolot for organizing and managing this whole program and this particular event. And our co-curators of the Ukrainian National Pavilion, Boris Filonenko, Elizaveta German, and Maria Lenkom. And to our friends in the NGO Open Place, and the Naked Room, and for the International Renaissance Foundation for supporting this event. And many thanks to the Biennial, the Venice Biennial, for hosting us in this beautiful building of Teatro Piccolo in Arsenale. And we continue this program with the next event in just a few weeks' time, in the last weekend of October, the 28th and the 29th of October, here in Venice. We will speak about unknown art histories fallen between the cracks. Those art histories that are somehow stay outside of the big narrative of art history as we know it, as we learn it, as we see it in museums. So all those stories that kind of fall out of the known and accepted normal narrative of art history. So I'm grateful for your time. Thank you for watching. All these sessions, all the conversations will be online as recordings on our YouTube and Facebook channel. And you can share them with your friends and colleagues, because it's important to spread the knowledge and share our thoughts with others, with colleagues and friends, to try to find solutions and build our future. Thank you so much. Slava Ukraini.